If you're 60 years old today, you could have another 30 years left of good life. If you're 45, you're only halfway through your lifespan. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel excited, or does it make you feel a little bit daunted because you're right in the middle of midlife and it's not feeling so good? Today I want to talk to you about these new life stages that we're going through that help us to age well, because we have so much more opportunity now than we did 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 20 years ago. Let's get into it. At the beginning of the 20th century, childhood was very short. Children left school at 12 and they went straight into the workplace and became mini adults. There were really just 3 stages of life: childhood, adulthood, and old age. And old age didn't last very long because the life expectancy was around 50 in Western countries. Compare that to today, where it's in our 80s. 1904, a psychologist called G. Stanley Hall identified another stage of life that we'd never thought about before, and he called it adolescence. The school leaving age in the UK rose to 14 in 1918, but even then, children tended to become family income generating units during puberty, so there was no time to be a teenager. That didn't really come through until the 1950s, when we saw the teenager come to prominence and adolescence really started to make sense. 120 years after G. Stanley Hall identified adolescence as a life stage, gerontologist and leadership coach Barbara Waxman identified another stage of life, a stage of life that she called middlescence. And she uses this to describe that period between middle age and old age. I just want to interrupt this video quickly to let you know that Aging Wonderfully Well, the good news about midlife and growing older, is now available on your local Amazon store. Grab your copy, buy some for your friends, and leave me a review on Amazon to let me know how you want to age wonderfully well. Back to the video. So this extra 30 years of life, which have been made possible through greater economic advances and scientific advances in health and well-being, actually come now, not at the end of life. But it's no use, is it, having an extra 30 years of life? If it's at a time when you're ill, we need to concentrate. To age wonderfully well, we need to be looking at our health span rather than our lifespan. And we'll look at that in another video in this series. If you're feeling a little bit skeptical about the fact that we have this extra 30 years of life in the middle, then think back to how your grandmother lived, how your mother lived, and compare it to your life now. I don't know about you, but I see so many women around me in their 70s and even their 80s who are running, weightlifting, looking after grandchildren, living lives of purpose and joy. Of course, this is difficult if we have health challenges, but even if we're declining physically, mentally and emotionally, we can still grow. And it's keeping that growth mindset that makes these extra years so joyful. To age wonderfully well, we need to stay curious. We need to stay engaged with life. We need to look around us and be open to new ideas, new ways of doing things. We need to take note of what younger people are saying and doing. We need to keep up with some of the music that comes out now. We don't have to like all of it, but it's good to know what's happening. Even watching TV gives you an idea of how people think that aren't necessarily in your generation. That can open our minds to so many different possibilities. To age wonderfully well, we need to surround ourselves with life-giving people, not emotional drains. We need to find people who, like us, are living our best lives. There's that old cliche, when we're in our 60s and 70s and beyond. I have 2 sisters, and when we meet up, the first half an hour of the conversation is usually taken up with comparing our various complaints. I'm the oldest of the 3, so I tend to have more than they do. But they're getting into that age now. But we're very, very careful to stop after half an hour and talk about more interesting things than how our knees feel or how our digestive system is doing this week. Have a think about who you spend your time with, what you talk about and what you do. Are you stuck in a rut? Are you mixing with people who don't want to get out of that rut and who feel quite comfortable doing the same things that they've always done and not opening their minds to anything new? There's comfort in familiarity. I'm not saying stop going to the garden centre for lunch with your mum. I wouldn't give that sort of thing up for the world. But that mustn't be the only thing that you do. And it mustn't be limited by your self-perception of what aging is. Barbara Waxman calls this a needless dissonance between reality and perception. And this limits our ability to grow. So I'd love to know, how are you going to sail through these years? Once the trials of perimenopause are out the way and you move into postmenopause, whether you're there or whether you're sailing towards it, how do you want your life to look? Because we can design our own lives. We don't have to be bound by what came before. Life has changed. We need to change with it to our benefit. That's all for now. See you next week.